Do you want a crash course in Buddhism? Do you want to hear the shortest way you could be introduced to the Buddha Dharma? I'll give you 4 of them on today's video. And we'll be dealing with early Buddhism, the way the Buddha actually divulged the teaching of the Dharma, coming right up. I'm Doug Smith of the Online Dharma Institute. That's onlinedharma.org. If you're new to this channel and interested in living a wiser and a kinder and a calmer life, consider subscribing to the channel and click the bell down below if you want to receive notifications when I come out with new videos. So, crash course. We want to try to find the shortest possible way of introducing ourselves to the Buddha Dharma. This is something that might be of interest even to scholars and people who've been around the teaching a long time. You know, how do you compact into a very short, pithy kind of way of understanding the Buddha's teaching? And I think a lot of people, if they were given this chance to give the Dharma in a nutshell form, they'd try to figure it out themselves. They'd say, you know, gosh, I'm going to, sit here for a while with my pen and paper and try to figure out a way to really say it concisely as possible. But actually, the Buddha and his early followers have already done the work for us. There are any number of very, very short, pithy explanations, descriptions of the Dharma of the Buddha. And what we're going to do today is to look at 4 of those. They're interrelated in various ways. And I think that their interrelations also will reveal other nuances of the early Buddhist approach. So, it might be helpful to listen to all of them. But if you want a really quick one, just listen to one, that should probably, at least will give you some introduction. So to take one very clear early example, we're going back to the Buddha here, and the Buddha is discussing the Dharma with his monastics, and he says, mendicants, monastics, if wanderers who follow another path were to ask you, friends, what's the purpose of living the spiritual life with the ascetic Gautama? You should answer them like this. The purpose of living the spiritual life under the Buddha is for the destruction of the taints. The purpose is for the destruction of the taints. Now, what are the taints? Traditionally, there are 3 taints. The taint of sensual desire, the taint of being, and the taint of ignorance. Now, what do these mean? The taint of sensual desire is our wanting pleasant experiences in our lives, and our being aversive to painful or unpleasant experiences. The way that when we have something pleasant occur to us, we want to cling to that. We want to retain it. We don't want it to go away. And conversely, when we have an unpleasant experience, we want to distance ourselves from it. We want to push it away. The taint of being, or existence, depending on how we understand that, is the taint of wanting to remain existing, wanting to remain alive, not wanting to cease existing, not wanting to die. This kind of basic impulse behind our continuing to live. And our inability to, let's say, make our peace with our own mortality. And the third is the taint of ignorance, which is, again, our sort of inability to make our peace or to understand what is possible for us to do and what is not possible. We don't really deeply understand that it's not possible to be immortal, let's say. That it's not possible to avoid unpleasant experiences all the time. That it's not possible to remain in pleasant experiences all the time. So that is the taint of ignorance, and you can see how the taint of ignorance underlies the other taints and in a sense supports them. So what the Buddha says is that the goal of pursuing practice under him is to basically cease our emotional attachment to these kinds of things, to cease our emotional attachment to pleasant experiences and our emotional revulsion against unpleasant ones, and to cease our emotional attachment to continued existence, to make our peace with mortality, if you like. Now, what the Buddha said here was that he was talking to his monastics, as you'll remember. He says that this is what you should say if confronted by wanderers from other paths. That is to say, other people, perhaps other mendicants, other wanderers in the forest, or just lay people who don't know about the Buddha's teaching. And as you might expect, back in the early days when Buddhism was just arising, there would have been a lot of encounters like this. A lot of encounters with wanderers from other paths, people who'd never heard of the Buddha Dharma. Indeed, most people at that time would not have heard of the Buddha Dharma. And so, if we look at the early texts, we'll find a number of different attempts that the Buddha and other of his followers give to explain the Dharma in this way to people who'd never heard it before. And so, we're going to look at another one. Let's look at another way that the Buddha explains, suggests that we should explain the Dharma to a wanderer from another belief system. And here the Buddha, and then there's also a later text in which his main disciple Sariputta says the same thing. He says, the purpose of living the spiritual life under the Buddha is extinguishment by non-clinging. Extinguishment by not clinging. That is a very strange thing to think about. And this is going to probably be the most complicated and difficult of any of the four that I'll be discussing today. But I think it's nonetheless interesting just to get a flavor of the depth that can be put into a small number of words. Now, the Pali text that the Buddha uses here is anupada parinibbana. That means extinguishment by not clinging, or at least that's one translation of it. But this can have, it's sort of a play on words. It can have different understandings of what it might, these words can be translated in different ways, let's put it that way. Anupada, which is not clinging, can also be understood, the word anupada can also be translated as fuel, as lack of fuel. That is to say, fuel or kindling for a fire. And parinibbana. Parinibbana is the word that's often used for nibbana, nirvana, but parinirvana means the final nirvana, what happens when the awakened being dies, their final nirvana. But nirvana also means a quenching or a going out as of a fire. Indeed, it's the quenching of the fires of greed, hatred, and ignorance. But if we understand it as a fire, it can also be understood as the going out of a fire when it lacks fuel, anupada, lacking fuel, parinibbana, the fire goes out. So it can be understood either as the final nirvana after the release of clinging to anything in the world. That is to say, on death, we release clinging to everything in the world, and so we go into a final nirvana. It can also mean that the fires of greed, hatred, and ignorance go out finally when there is a lack of fuel. The lack of fuel is the lack of clinging. That is to say, the fuel is the clinging. This is, again, a play on words. The fuel and clinging are the same word. And that clinging is the fuel that retains us within samsara, that keeps us bound to the world. And this idea of final nirvana, that's that parinibbana, that final nirvana, it can be understood as that once this fire has been quenched due to lack of fuel, it then never comes up again. So, for example, we have nirvana once, we don't need to have it again. Once we've done that, once the fires of greed, hatred, and ignorance have gone out, then they're gone out forever. They're gone out for good. It can also have the connotation, indeed it does have the traditional connotation that it's gone out for good in the sense that we're never reborn into a future life. That's the idea of parinibbana for the Buddha traditionally, or for any arahant, for any awakened being, is that once they have final nirvana, then they're never reborn into a future life. So there's a lot packed into a couple of very pithy words, and that often happens with these attempts to distill the Dharma down into a single sentence. And I think we can also begin to see how the recursive nature of the Dharma, in the sense that if you describe it from one angle and fully understand what that angle means, you end up understanding another angle as well. And all these different angles are described in different ways by the Buddha so that we can have, as it were, different different takes, different visions, different angles on the Dharma from different ways, so that we see it's like a three-dimensional thing, and when we see it just from one angle, we're only seeing one face of it. But if we come from a different angle, then although the Dharma is the same, we're seeing different aspects of it, and that can help us to understand it in its complexity, in its fullness. So let's take a third one of these pithy Dharma in a nutshell kind of statements. The purpose of living the spiritual life under the Buddha is to completely understand suffering. Now, the Pali word for suffering here, as you may know, is dukkha. Dukkha can be translated in many different ways. Another translation that I generally prefer, actually, is unsatisfactoriness. That is, to completely understand the unsatisfactory nature of life. Now, the Buddha then goes on in this sutta to describe what that is, what it is to completely understand dukkha in this sense. And what he says is that we want to completely understand how all of the information we get through our senses is unsatisfactory to one degree or another. That is to say, clearly we may receive unpleasant things through our senses. Those are unsatisfactory, pretty obviously. But sometimes we receive pleasant experiences. We see a beautiful sunset, we hear beautiful music. Those are unsatisfactory as well, in that they're impermanent. They're not perfect refuges. They're not the sort of things that we can rely upon. Because although they may be pleasant, they're only pleasant for a time. And then either they extinguish, they cease to exist, or we ourselves may cease to appreciate them. I think we all may understand the experience of having some pleasant thing that goes on and on and on, and after a time we grow bored of it. We cease seeing it as pleasant. In a prior video I talked about the experience of a blue jay. A blue jay is a beautiful bird, a beautiful blue bird with beautiful patterns on the wings and the tail. But they're so common around where I am, where we are, that seeing them isn't pleasant anymore. We just see them too often. There's a certain pleasantness that comes with seeing something only once in a while, where when we see it too much, we get bored of it, we cease really seeing it as such. And that's another way that pleasantness is, or I should say, that the information from the senses is unsatisfactory. It's not the sort of thing that we can count on. And indeed, we saw in the prior example how we want to release craving or release clinging to these things, that the awakening comes from the release of clinging and craving. And one of the ways that we can begin to release around clinging and craving is to see these things as unsatisfactory. It's when we completely understand dukkha, when we completely understand this kind of suffering, that clinging releases itself, that we cease to see these things as so desirable, shall we say. And when we cease seeing them as desirable, then we aren't as emotionally involved in them. We aren't as emotionally involved in them being a certain way, because we understand that no matter what way they are, they're not going to be perfect refuges. They're not going to be perfect. They're not going to be really, really the sorts of things that we want to cling to, because they'll always be changing. And this is indeed one of the reasons why completely understanding dukkha, or completely understanding suffering, is really the heart of the Buddhist path, and one way to understand the Buddhist path in its entirety. Now, the fourth one of these is one, pretty famous one from the Dhammapada, which is a wonderful early Buddhist compilation of the Dharma, if you like, in a relatively short package, shall we say, small package. But here it is even shorter, one single stanza from the Dhammapada, which says, "To avoid all evil, to cultivate good, and to cleanse one's mind, this is the teaching of the Buddhas." Now, this is a more, we might say, down-to-earth kind of understanding of the Buddha Dharma, one that's more obviously focused on ethical living than the other ones we just saw. But what do they really entail? Well, not to do evil, that means avoiding the kinds of actions that are fomented, that are created by greed, by hatred, by ignorance, these kinds of things that are hurtful. Now, to do good means to try to foster the kinds of actions that are created by the opposite of those kinds of impulses. That is to say, actions that are created by kindness, that come from compassion, that come from generosity, that come from wisdom. These are the kinds of actions we want to foster, that we want to promote. But the question is, how do we do that in the longer term? Now, I mean, in the shorter term, perhaps we can just look to this kind of formula and try to just be kinder to people. But that sort of practice is not going to be very helpful in the medium to long term. In the medium to long term, what we have to do is to reorient our minds, purify our minds in the way that the stanza suggests. How do we then train or cleanse our mind? The way that the Buddha suggests to do this is through mindfulness meditation. Just to take one example, that we sit with the mind. We see how it operates. We see what happens when we act in certain ways and when we act in other ways. We come to be aware of the character of the mind when the mind is filled with greed or filled with anger or hatred, or when it seems to be filled with delusions or ignorance. We come to be aware that greed is not, for example, greed is not helpful to us. That a greedy mind is a pain-filled mind, and that acting upon that pain that underlies the greed is not to our long-term benefit. And when we see that, then we try to make changes. Or, perhaps it's better said, the changes seem to happen on their own. That when we understand that anger or hatred is painful, and that anger or hatred only makes us lash out and hurt other people and really hurt ourselves in the process, that kind of anger or hatred begins to dry up on its own. It doesn't have quite the same pull with us that it did before the practice. And of course, we also begin to see that ignorance about the way the world works is not to our best interests, that wisdom and knowledge of the world is the surest route towards effective and skillful action in our own lives and in the lives of the people that are close to us. And also, as we are on this path of practice, we begin to see that purifying the mind, cleansing the mind, involves understanding the inherently unsatisfactory nature of phenomena. That, as we've already seen, grasping or clinging to things or being greedy about things, hating things that are unpleasant to us, are not going to be a route towards a final answer. That we need indeed to release clinging, to release this kind of emotional grasping onto things being a certain way, which, as we know, they never can be. And when we do this, as we approach this kind of end, as we practice in this way, we find a mind arises that is more at ease, that is more equanimous. Our goal here being a kind of equanimity. And one of the ways that the Buddha talks about gaining this kind of equanimity is through a practice of what is termed sense restraint. And that is exactly the sort of practice that's suggested in several of these verses that I've mentioned in today's video. And I have an earlier video also on this kind of equanimity through sense restraint, which I'll put a link to up on the screen here. I would suggest checking it out. You might find it a very interesting kind of practice. Thanks so much to all of you. If you get anything useful out of these videos, check out my Patreon page and consider deciding if you want to join them. Thanks so much to all my patrons over on Patreon, and I hope we'll catch you on the next video. Meanwhile, all of you be well.